Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Junaid Bostan versus Bilal Fawaz fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video. And this is a Patreon requested video. And if you want to request your own kind of combat sporting related content to see on the channel, you can go to the Patreon. There's been plenty of videos that have come as a result of it so far, of course including this one, and I really appreciate all the members in which have got on there at the moment. The sport has been excellent, and the link will be in the description. Let's get straight into this one though. So of course, this is a fight in which is on the undercard of Dave Allen versus Arsenbek Makhmudov. There will also be a prediction for the Reece Belotti versus Josh Padley fight coming out soon, and of course we've also got the prediction already out for the main event as well. So again, pretty much going through the whole of this card with predictions, which I'm excited for. This fight is an exciting fight to me as well, because as a kind of British boxing fan, that was pretty much how I started out as a supporter and as a fan. And seeing these type of fights, where the home fighters had to go through some adversity, and the fighter who's come from a small hall kind of show has showcased that he's got skills and ability, and that he's warranted this rematch. It's an exciting idea. It's an exciting concept. It's happened a few times in British boxing history, and this is the most recent time in which it's happened. And it's always exciting to see, because you can see how much it means to the fighter, who in this case is Bilal Fawaz, who's come from the small hall shows and has had to work hard to get this opportunity, and has come in as the away fighter and has caused the upset. Obviously he didn't win in that first fight, but it was an upset, and arguably in a lot of people's eyes he did do enough to win that fight. So again, that this rematch is definitely necessary. And of course, the first fight was a surprising result to see. I mean, someone who hasn't had the same backing, who I'm sure a lot of the fans hadn't heard of, in Bilal Fawaz, going up against Bostan, who has been KOing most of his opponents and going through the rankings, being able to, get stoppages with great amounts of ease. I mean, he stopped Jack Martin. That was probably one of his more impressive stoppage victories, and that was, around this kind of similar level. And, the fact that he was able to have a lot of trouble with Bilal Fawaz was, of course, a surprising thing. And again, it was maybe Bostan just couldn't really deal with the fact that he was kind of a big co-main event feature, and he was, the first time like that in his card, he had a lot of attention on him. Or, of course, maybe it is just in general the Fawaz style was just not made for him, and he couldn't, get through it. Get through that. And of course we will have to wait and see. This fight will of course prove that. I mean, Fawaz has had to work hard to come through the small hall, like I mentioned, and to get to the position in which he is now, and fight on a big show like this. I mean, this is by far going to be the best money in which he's ever probably had. I'm sure he's probably getting better money for this than he is in the first fight. And it's a great example for other small hall fighters, to show them that they need to take the opportunities given to them, and really just take everything with both hands. And you can't just pick and choose. You really got to just take what you're given, and you can sometimes come out and you can look amazing, and this is pretty much what Fawaz was able to do. And of course, if you look at both their records, there is that kind of victory between the both of them that's similar. In the Ryan Amos fight, they both went to quite a convincing decision win against Ryan Amos, and that's not an easy task, because Amos, somebody in which we've had on the channel multiple times, is a tough physical fighter. And the fact that they both had that as a kind of similarity, again, is something in which you can look at and go, maybe they are on a similar kind of skill set and a similar kind of level, even though, of course, Fawaz hasn't fought, any other kind of fighters similar to Junaid Bostan, and typically has fought at a lower level and hasn't been able to get the same kind of level of stoppages. I weren't actually sure if this rematch was going to be made. I mean, for quite a while, Bostan went quite quiet, and I think the first fight was, from my memory, around about the start of this year, and I felt like they were going to try and make the rematch for around about, June time, maybe July time. But the fact that it's taken all the way to October is quite surprising. I mean, I feel like I might be kind of tripping a bit, but from my memory, there was some kind of rumor or something was happening with the possibility of Junaid Bostan going and fighting somebody else instead, and kind of brushing past the Fawaz fight, and going on a big undercard of another card, and it wouldn't have surprised me if that would have happened. It would have been a shame if that would have happened, and it would have been unfair for Fawaz. But again, I've seen it happen in boxing where the promoter is a big name promoter and sees a bigger fight come up available, and goes to try go down that route instead. And also the fact that it wasn't a loss on Bostan's record, they could have gone and done that, but of course I respect them for wanting and kind of saying this fight has to be next, like they said right after the fight was finished the first time round. To speak about both fighters individually, Bostan, typically, he's a fast-handed fighter who's quite sharp and has got good defensive movement for the most part, and can kind of slip himself out of or spin you out of bad positions in which he might get in. If he got backed up in the corner in the early kind of parts of the fight, he was able to slip out or spin, Fawaz and get out of them bad positions. And typically, he's able to manage range quite well. He's able to find his own range pretty quickly. And again, in the earlier rounds, he was making Fawaz miss at a mid range, and I think he does fight best at a mid range. He works angles quite well when you look at some of his knockouts and stuff like that as well. The punches he throws come from a variety of good angles. And again, he's a very skilled fighter, a very technical fighter, and he's got a great team around him as well. But again, there was just something clear and obvious that went wrong in that first fight. He pretty much has most of his work coming off his jab. He's got good feints. He's able to maintain his movement pretty much for the majority of the fight. Of course, I'll touch upon where perhaps he didn't really do that in the first fight, but for the most part, he is able to kind of keep moving. He's typically is an accurate fighter. I think he's got better shot variety and typically is a cleaner to the eye puncher than that of Fawaz, who's a bit more of a kind of take what he can get type of fighter, where he's just going to be punching all over and hoping to land. Whereas Boston, you can see him set up the shots a bit better, and you can see him, you know, throwing the shots cleaner and landing them more accurately. And when they do land, they do look better, and they do look, like eye scoring, like good punches to the judges. I'm sure the judges are seeing that and going, that's landed well, that's a nice clean shot. He explodes into his punches quite well, and also at the same time I think he's got a good chin. I mean, that first fight, in that seventh round, eighth round, he was taking a lot of punishment, but he was able to keep going and keep trying to plod through, even though, like I say, he was taking a lot of clean shots on the chin. Like I say, Fawaz isn't a big power puncher, but to be able to take that many shots on the chin from anybody is impressive, especially when you're that tired and you've already taken punishment through a lot of the other rounds. That was an impressive showing of a good chin, where of course he needs to showcase that at some point and face that adversity to be able to push through that in his career. Every fighter has to deal with that, and I suppose at least having a tough fight like this early on in his career is better than having it later on and not knowing how to deal with that adversity. Negatives about him, I think he can, be more inviting of pressure. He was definitely putting himself in bad positions and putting himself on the ropes in that first fight. I think he definitely came in overconfident. I think they were both very confident, but I think Fawaz was coming in with that underdog mentality where he was, looking surprised and shocked whenever he landed a shot to really play up to a character, whereas Bostan was genuinely just, it did seem like it was kind of frustrating him when things weren't really going his way and he was trying to laugh it off. But again, you could see that overconfidence then. He was doing a bit too much as well, early on when he was dancing around and things like that as well. He was trying to play up to Fawaz, and at that point he's fighting Fawaz's game. He can, fall over his front foot a little bit when he's coming in. And again, he can be a little bit off balance when he is throwing multiple shots. His hands are low and his chin is in the air. These were things that were very obvious again in that seventh, eighth round, he was just keeping his hands tremendously low. And even when he was getting caught with a lot of punches, he just had no kind of want inside of him to actually pick up his hands, which was just very surprising. He did start to load up in the corner with some of his shots too much at times, and then Fawaz would land a couple of simple shots and then back off. And that was impressive game plan and game management from Fawaz. But again, he shouldn't be putting himself in bad positions and trying to load up on the big shot to try and knock out Fawaz. He is open to counters, and of course that was something that was obvious. Fawaz was countering him pretty much all night. He did seem hurt later on, and like I say, he was definitely allowing himself to get hit, and I did think that he tired himself out a bit as well. But again, for the most part, he was able to still, move after taking quite a few shots. He would then try and move around and stuff, so there was still enough in the tank for him to be able to do more. But again, he did seem to tire himself out considerably. Fawaz, as a fighter, he's got a tight guard, but a weird kind of awkward guard where he'll either be going for the Philly shell or just kind of have both of his hands kind of in front of him in some weird kind of position, which is a bit of like a retro kind of guard. But it is difficult to find the openings and the gaps to that, and he definitely at least is catching a lot more shots than what Bostan was. He's a come forward fighter who tries to walk you down. He doesn't get discouraged, which was definitely something we saw in that fight. He was able to throw when his opponent threw and definitely just disrupted the rhythm of the entirety, throughout the entirety of the fight. He did not let Bostan get into a rhythm because every time Bostan went to throw, Fawaz was trying to throw back with, multiple shots instead of just a singular. He can fight at a mid-range or in close. I think at a mid-range he just struggle at times finding his distance, but in close, he shortens up his shots nicely. He's got good point scoring punches and changes levels well. He's got a good chin, I believe, himself, and he does know how to frustrate his opponents, whether that's playing up to his character where he was kind of acting shocked or overconfident in the fight, or if he's just in general trying to disrupt your rhythm. Both things will frustrate opponents. He's also not greedy in his work as well. I think he is still well disciplined. Like I say, the times in which he was just backing up Bostan and then just putting in a couple shots, then backing up himself, not allowing himself to get caught with that silly kind of loaded up shot, which is a predictable shot to see. He does kind of start to creep in closer and closer throughout the fight, and he's willing to be physical, even though he's not actually that physically strong. I think Bostan is the stronger fighter out of the two, but I think he is, more willing to be physical, Fawaz, whereas Bostan wants to be the cleaner kind of fighter. He's got solid offensive timing. He's got an awkward guard, like I say. And to speak more about kind of more the negatives, I suppose, to an extent from that first fight, I think he has got worse footwork and speed. He definitely does square up a lot more, and in general he is quite a still target throughout the majority of the fight. He, like I say, has struggles finding range early on and is the more flat-footed out of the two, or there are times in which he gets a bit overconfident and overexcited and he starts kind of jumping off the canvas into his shots, and that can really put him off balance. He can be made to follow quite often as well, and he has less power in his shots. He has less agility. He can stand in range too long and can also just launch himself in, like I say, kind of jumping in. He doesn't turn into his punches as well, and his hooks can be a bit slappy as well, which also does take the power out of them, and he's not really setting up his shots as much or, working the angles as well. It is just, like I say, take what he can get, which is, pretty much the mindset in which I suppose you do have to have in these type of fights. His head was on the line continuously, and I think he does get caught by a jab a lot, but just Bostan, really started to play into Fawaz's hands in that first fight, and he was just not utilising his jab anywhere near enough into them later rounds. He can start wasting fights when he is kind of being a bit too aggressive, and again, like I say, I don't actually think he is that strong. Who do I think is going to win in this fight? I'm going to go with a Junaid Bostan unanimous decision. I think the judges have shown that they're going to be in the favour of Junaid Bostan. Of course, that's not really what you want. You want it to be even, but it's obvious that it's not going to be, especially with Bostan fighting in Sheffield as well. But I also think Bostan, it's the kind of obvious case that I think Bostan wasn't at his best at that night, and I think Fawaz was at his best. So I think if Bostan can show the improvements, I think he can go on to win via decision. I don't believe he's going to be able to stop Fawaz, because I think Fawaz is a tough fighter to be able to stop. And I think if Bostan doesn't get, tremendously frustrated again, and if he doesn't start, fighting his fight, and if he actually keeps his hands up, I think there's a lot more simpler things in which Bostan can do to be able to win this fight. I think if he just keeps his hands up a bit more, if he utilizes his jab a bit more, and if he actually starts trying to, plant his feet a bit at times and come forwards a bit with his hands up a bit higher, utilize that jab, and then actually utilize his power into his shots then, and try and push back Fawaz, that would be probably his best game plan to be able to win. Because like I say, I think he can be the more physical to actually push back Fawaz, but just he's got to make sure that he's not putting himself in silly positions and, like I say, just becoming irresponsible with his work. But like I say, I think he's going to win via decision. And then it'll be difficult to kind of say where he can go on to next, really, because, I'm sure if he goes out and wins, via knockout, he can actually get pushed along a bit more in his career. But I think what Matchroom have seen from the first fight, and if this goes to a, decision where he still does take a bit of punishment, then they're probably not going to want to push him on too quickly. So I think he'll probably stay around this English level for a little bit longer. So maybe somebody like an Ethan James, that could possibly be a good fight, or a James Moorcroft, or an Egbenike. There's plenty of good fighters in the super welterweight division around English to British level, but I think, you've got to look maybe slightly below that to just kind of welcome up somebody to fight for the English title, from, again, probably the small hall, for something like a Bostan at the moment, until he gets that confidence back, and then, he can go from there. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.